Good morning. Welcome to Tea, Toast and Marmalade. I am Maya Malay and I am in the studio this morning. While I was eating my toast and marmalade, I sat gazing out the window. Now there was a snowstorm that passed through here overnight, and even though I heard the wind whistling and the windows rattling, I couldn't be bothered to get up and see what was taking place. So I woke up this morning, just like on Christmas morning, to a wonderful, beautiful coat of shimmering white, frosted branches, all being held up by the pine and cedar trees. It is so pretty. Now in February, I will not want to say that. I will be hoping it is gone, but right now it is extremely pleasant. I am not sure what sends birds into a frenzy when the snow arrives, but as I look out my window at the bird feeders, I can see crowds of birds coming and going, causing a great ruckus over the nuts and the suet. It is actually a wonderful display of nature. The scene just makes you feel so warm and cozy, but that's because I'm on the inside. So back into the studio where I am now pouring my tea. As mentioned earlier, I did eat my toast and marmalade prior. I do that for you just so you know, because I am so very thoughtful and I didn't want you to hear me crunching into the microphone and chewing with food in my mouth. So that, dear friends, is a gift I give to you. Just joking. My tea today is David's Organic Breakfast Blend. Very nice tea if you're wanting to try something new. The packaging though does say high caffeine. That is either a good thing or a bad thing depending on what it is you want out of a tea. But for a breakfast tea, it is quite nice. So that's my blurb on tea and what I'm drinking this morning. Now, over the years and through all my trials and tribulations, I recall numerous occasions where I felt extremely overwhelmed by life, by all the things that I needed to do or take care of, by all the stress and all the weight of those must-dos, have-tos, and really don't want-tos. In fact, I sometimes feel like that even when we're doing renovations in the house and everything is misplaced or displaced, or when my actual workload at work is a bit too much, or even when so many things need to find a permanent place in the home and there's just no space. There are so many things that could make a person feel overwhelmed. It is even real to feel overwhelmed by fears that one must face in order to get things done. Sometimes the sheer volume of things that need attention can literally immobilize a person. I am somebody that does not do too well in the midst of environmental chaos. I've always been that way. I have to clean my kitchen before I can even begin to cook. I need things to be really organized and clear. And with those two things alone, being organized and clear, it really helps me to accomplish things on my to-do list. So if you can relate and have felt this way or often feel this way, then I will begin by saying this. As I usually say, it is extremely normal to feel overwhelmed from time to time. It is especially normal to feel overwhelmed when emotions are running high, when trauma has sideswiped you, and when fatigue is ever present. Now, some years back, I found myself in connection with a women's shelter. What a wonderful place this was, and for those women who needed to find safety and solitude, it was like a huge embrace from someone close. I learned from this shelter as they shared their work with me, and I wanted to share the work they do with you. and two very important lessons that I learned from them. Now, I learned more than two lessons, but today I'm going to share two lessons that the shelter taught me. When the women entered the shelter, they were noticeably weary from the war that raged inside them and in the environment that surrounded them. They were completely depleted of the everyday struggles to survive and keep their head above water while tending to children, filling numerous voids and gaps. So in actual fact, they were running on empty. Those women forced themselves to smile and face the world as if nothing were wrong, all the time balancing on the edge of a tightrope, their feet painful from the broken glass they trod on daily. Those women often arrived at the shelter feeling battered and broken, lost and weak, fearful, and totally exhausted. And so both women and children had no idea what was waiting for them, nor did they know how to function. And in some cases, they weren't even really aware of what just happened because it happened so fast. It was like a whirlwind they were caught up in. However, the shelter had amazing staff who were part of the first embrace and who totally understood the stress upon the women and the children that came there to stay. In response to that, the staff and the management had a very strategic approach to helping the women begin a new journey of their own. The shelter had ways of helping the ladies grow strong and stand on their own 2 feet, gain knowledge on how to care for their own needs and the needs of their children. The shelter also introduced them to resources that were available in the community that both women and children could access. It was as if an unknown family just suddenly appeared and surrounded them. Because the women arrived at the shelter in the worst possible state imaginable and were without any direction or vision and hadn't even looked past that one night that changed their world, the shelter itself helped pick up the pieces for the first little bit. Those fundamentals I'm talking about that are necessary, women arriving at the shelter cannot even think about. They have no idea what to do, what they need to do, and in many cases, how to do it. It is frightening for those whose lives are turned upside down and who then are thrown into places and positions they know nothing about. They are completely lost. The shelter just takes control at the onset by making sure that the women and children have all the items they need, and they provide belongings, personal care products, food, clothing, sleeping quarters. And because the shelter was in the business of looking after such brokenness, they knew exactly what daily activities needed to be taken care of. In time, they also helped the women and the children out with lawyers and court aides, and they provided protection and security. The night of entry all the way through to the time that they left, because they had extensive security systems in place. The shelter also sets the women up with community financial aid where needed to help them look after themselves and some of their own personal bills. So those are some of the things that shelters for women do when the women arrive there. And the women also have available to them counseling and coaching where life tactics, survival skills were shared in order to establish a foundation for their future lives. Tactics that helped them now in the situation they're in, but also gave them strategies for the future. Now, one of those life skills taught was on dealing with feeling overwhelmed. I've already stated that feeling overwhelmed is normal. We all have moments or days when we feel that way. Although for those women who have experienced trauma, their coping skills are not functioning at their best, and as a result, the sense of being overwhelmed can be quite debilitating, more so than usual. So how best to deal with the feeling of being extremely overwhelmed when you almost feel like breaking down just thinking about how much you need to take care of, or when feeling overwhelmed almost immobilizes you? When you notice you are feeling like this, I would suggest that you do what the shelter showed me how they teach their women to do, and that is number one. You take a pen and a piece of paper and you write down absolutely every single thing that goes through your mind. Now, I know this seems pointless because we already know what's going through our minds, but that's not why we do it. There is a method to this madness. We do this for the sake of our brains. So let's try this. Write down every task, every worry, every thought, every must do, have to, scared to do, literally every single thing you have on your mind. Even if you know what's on your mind, write it down anyway. You would not think so, but the very simple process of writing your every thought down on paper begins a brand new process in your brain. Your brain begins to feel less stressed because it doesn't need to work so hard to remember everything. It begins to relax, to let go, to rest, and to be at peace. It doesn't need to keep running at hyper speed to keep up with all that it contains. The very thoughts are now on paper, which means your brain can now thank you for allowing it to relax. That is the beginning process. It is surprising how you suddenly feel better, which means you won't forget anything either. Being overwhelmed can happen because there is just too much to take care of, too much to think about, too much to work out, or because of fear of not knowing you can take care of things, or because the trauma, the stress, the busyness in your life will not let you rest. The overwhelmed feeling comes from the brain. So I think because I use this tactic, and I do truly use it, that when you begin to write things down, your brain actually believes it's doing business. And when one does business, we do not tend to be emotionally connected with that piece of business we're doing. Kind of like filing at work or doing some other mundane job. We don't tend to feel all emotional about filing or doing some random job. So I believe that the brain thinks you are just taking care of business and detaches emotionally, which in turn allows the brain to rest. Now, I am no expert in the brain or anything else really, but I do know that I learned this tactic, and I can quite often feel overwhelmed when there is too much on my plate. And when I use this, it actually works for me. I can rest because now it's on paper. I thank the shelter for letting me learn this and for teaching it to the women there as well. So what comes next? Once this enormous amount of stuff is on a piece of paper, your page is full, back, front, more than one piece of paper if you're me, you can look at it. If you are one who likes to file and organize, you can do that with the items on your list. You can even categorize the items into different categories, if that is what you would like to do. You may notice that one more worry or thought is actually connected to another and belongs in the same category. And in some cases, if you take care of one thing on your list, something else may be taken care of as well. For some people, they don't want to categorize. what is on the page, so they completely skip this step. That's fine. But those of you who are organizers and planners, it's good to have those categories because our brains prefer to be organized, and categories mean organization. Once you have these in categories, you can prioritize them. If you choose to not categorize the words on your page, you can still prioritize them. Now, I said this before and I'm saying it again, you really don't have to do any of this if you don't want to. It's up to you. The next vital piece of information or lesson for being overwhelmed was to learn how to do only one piece of business a day. So these two lessons sort of go together. First you write everything down and then you learn what to do with it. So here's the second part of that. Once everything's on your page, once everything's prioritized, you can then move on to the next step. And this, I can actually tell you, has completely changed my life. And that is one piece of business a day. Now here's an example of what that just might look like to a lady just arriving at a shelter. So let's say a lady arrives at the shelter and she needs to change her driver's license from one province to another. And the process for her was just too much to think about. She was just overwhelmed at the very thought of even thinking about doing this. The trauma in her life left her in an emotional breakdown and her coping skills were next to nil. But it had to be done by her. So the shelter would come alongside and walk her through each and every step. So this lady started with writing everything down, and the staff members helped her prioritize the items on the paper. And then she began with the second part of learning, which was one piece of business a day. Day 1, she wrote down all the steps needed in order to accomplish the desired outcome, which was to change her driver's license to her present address and her present province. One piece of business a day. She wrote it all down, and then she spent the rest of the day looking after herself, sleeping, resting, reading, watching television, whatever. One piece of business a day. Day 2, she found writing paper, which she probably asked the staff for, and that was her one piece of business a day. And then, once she had the writing paper in her hand, she went back to spend the rest of the day looking after herself, sleeping, resting, reading. One piece of business a day. Day 3, she wrote the letter requesting a driver's abstract, which she needed to take to the license office. That was her one piece of business today. And then she spent the rest of the day looking after herself, sleeping, resting, having a bubble bath, reading, whatever. Day 4, she put the letter into an envelope that the staff had given her. That was her one piece of business today. Then she spent the rest of the day looking after herself, sleeping, resting, reading, watching television, going for a walk. Day 5, she wrote the address onto the envelope and put a stamp on it. That was her one piece of business today. Then she spent the rest of the day looking after herself, sleeping, resting, reading. Day 6, she walked with a staff member to the mailbox and mailed it. That was her one piece of business today. Then she spent the rest of the day looking after herself, sleeping, resting, having a shower, doing her nails, whatever she felt like doing. Now there were more steps on her list, but she could not complete those to get her driver's license changed until she had received the abstract from the previous province. So she did some other things that were prioritized on her letter. To some, this seems ridiculous, but I can actually vouch that this tactic works. I have used it when things in my life have felt incredibly overwhelming. Those little bits were all she could handle, and in the midst of her trauma, and guess what? The job was completed. Now, this is just one example of doing one piece of business a day. Anything you have on your list can be looked after in the same way. Write it down, break it into steps, and just do one step a day. The lady I'm speaking of approached each and every one of her to-do tasks from her list in this very same way, and she completed each and every one of them 100%. Yes, it took a little longer than some other ladies, but that was not the point of learning this tactic. This survival technique was meant so that she could carry it over into every part of her life for the rest of her life. One piece of business a day. Her life was upside down, and when she arrived at the shelter and she needed to learn new life skills and to turn her life back around in such a way that the life she created by herself would actually be her own life. When she was at war with her abuser, her life was not her own. The shelter is aware of this, and therefore they are not in a hurry to rush people because they know the woman is building something brand new and it needs to last her a lifetime if possible. And while she is taking care of one piece of business a day, she was learning to take care of all business. She was learning to deal with the feeling of being overwhelmed. She was learning how to make self-care a vital part of her existence and her routine. And when a woman knows how to look after herself on all levels, she has confidence and she feels together and strong. All of these things she will carry forward in her life and will even most likely share them when an opportunity arises. The lesson here is slow and steady wins the race. Slow and steady wins the race. Who said it needs to be done in one sitting or in one day? When you cannot think because it is all too much, these tiny bite-sized functions make perfect sense. Think about how many pieces of business you can accomplish each and every month using this tactic, and think about how much self-care you will give yourself by learning this new tactic. New habits are formed and 30 pieces of business taken care of at the end of each and every month. That is a lot of business taken care of. The other cool thing about this is that it becomes a new tool for those procrastinators out there who learned how to accomplish something every single day and felt a great sense of accomplishment and change. By using this method, the stress is relieved. Our brains rest. We accomplish something every day. We make self-care a priority, and we feel really good about all the business we have taken care of. So to recap, write everything down to cause your brain to relax. one piece of business a day from your priority list, self-care becomes vitally important. Now, I hope these survival skills will help you when those overwhelming feelings cause you stress, fear, and almost immobilize you. So, until next time, this is Maya Malay signing off from Tea, Toast and Marmalade. God bless you.